You've heard many war stories, but you've rarely heard one like this. Because this isn't about the strongest soldier, the most experienced commander, or a hastily created secret weapon. It's about something completely different. It's about a dog that, in the midst of the cruelest winter of World War II, did something no human being could perceive. And that's no exaggeration. It was a simple, quick, almost instinctive act. But it changed the fate of an entire platoon. And if you think you already know where this story is going, forget it. Nothing here is obvious, nothing is predictable. Every detail of that day was marked by real tension, human error, fear, smoke, snow, and a silence that seemed to announce disaster. The scene begins with a group of soldiers advancing slowly, almost dragging their feet, because the snow was so deep it swallowed their boots. They could barely see 2 meters ahead because of the fog. Everything seemed dead, still, lifeless. And it is precisely in these moments that war most likes to take someone by surprise. It was an apparently tranquil terrain, but something was wrong there, only no one noticed. No one except the dog. He walked a few steps ahead, sniffing the ground, ignoring distant gunshots, ignoring hurried orders, as if he was sensing something that made no sense to anyone else. The problem was that, back then, many soldiers didn't pay much attention to the dog's signals. They thought it was fear, stress, exhaustion, but this time it was different. This time he froze, literally froze. He stopped with his paws firmly planted in the snow, slowly raised his head, and let out a single short bark. It wasn't a long warning. It wasn't desperation. It was a dry, quick, direct sound, enough to chill the blood of whoever heard it. Because that bark wasn't normal, and on that day, at that exact minute, that small signal was what separated life and death. But the story doesn't end there, because right after that bark came the moment that changed everything. The dog turned to the side, began digging forcefully, desperately, as if it had found something that no one else could see. And it was there, when the soldiers finally looked down, that the truth appeared. There was something hidden under the snow, something precisely set up, something that shouldn't be there. And when they understood what it was, their legs simply trembled, because it wasn't just a trap. It was a plan to eliminate the entire platoon at once. From that point on, every second became a decision that could cost everyone's lives, and what happened next was a succession of unexpected twists and turns, things that show how sometimes survival depends on those you least expect. And that's why this story remained hidden, told only among veterans. Today you'll learn everything: the trap, the scare, the platoon's reaction, the unexpected detour, and the impact it had on the rest of the operation. Now tell me something. Are you really ready to find out what was under that snow, and why that single bark changed the entire battle? Because after you listen to this story to the end, you'll understand why that dog was never treated as just a military dog. Tell me, would you have noticed that danger hidden in the snow, or would you have kept going, thinking it was just another day in the war? Before continuing the story, give it a like to support the channel and subscribe so you don't miss the next stories, because each video has a different twist. And while you're at it, comment below which city you're watching from. That really helps our community grow. The platoon advanced slowly, pushing through the snow with their chests, as if each step were a fight against the entire world. The early morning was so cold that even their breathing felt like locomotive fumes. The soldiers walked in silence, not because they wanted to, but because any noise could give away their position to the enemy. The battlefront was unstable. Hidden snipers, buried mines, wires of traps crisscrossing the ground. That part of the map was known precisely for that. No one set foot there without risking disappearing in seconds. Even so, it was through there that the platoon had to pass. Commander Anderson, experienced as he was, had seen it all in that war, but that day he was more tense than usual. He looked in every direction, calculating every tree, every stone, every shadow that could hide some danger. But the only one who actually seemed to see anything real was the platoon's dog, Cooper, a German shepherd accustomed to explosions, gunfire, grenades, cold, and chaos. He had saved lives before, but nothing compared to what was about to happen. The wind was blowing strongly, raising small whirlwinds of snow that obscured visibility. The terrain seemed clear, but that was precisely what made the commander suspicious. Too clear a terrain always hid something, and it was at that moment that Cooper began to act differently. He wasn't just sniffing the ground as usual. He was restless, pacing in circles, looking down with an insistence that no one there could interpret. Sergeant Miller was the first to notice. "Anything wrong, kid?" he murmured, trying to keep his voice down. Cooper responded with a short, dry growl. It wasn't aggressive, it was a warning, as if to say, "Pay attention." But as always happens in war, the platoon was too tired to interpret signals. 2 soldiers complained about the weight of their backpacks. Another rubbed his frozen fingers inside his glove. Another tripped over a root hidden under the snow. Everyone's mind was overwhelmed. And that's exactly when death usually catches someone unprepared. Cooper took 3 steps, planted his paws on the ground, and slowly raised his snout. The bark came like a shot, a single, loud sound that cut through the icy air. Everyone stopped instantly. The commander turned immediately. What happened? Why did he bark? Nobody knew the answer. Cooper couldn't take his eyes off a specific spot on the ground. He started digging forcefully, throwing snow everywhere. He seemed desperate, but no one understood why. Sergeant Miller tried to pull him by the leash, thinking the dog was having some kind of stress-induced episode, but Cooper pulled back. He dug even deeper, faster, his fingernails hitting something hard. The sound was so different from the snow that the commander realized immediately that something was wrong. "Wait," Anderson said. "Let him. Go, leave him alone." The platoon stood motionless. The only sound was Cooper's hooves tearing up chunks of snow, until it appeared. First, just a whitish metal, then pieces of thin wire. Wire that shouldn't have been there. Wire that no one had seen. Wire that, if pulled or pressed, could destroy everything around them in a second. Private Harris, the youngest member of the team, turned white. "Is that a girl?" he asked, his voice faltering. The commander crouched down, looked closely, and held his breath. "It's not just a mine. This is a collection of explosives linked together in sequence." Silence turned to mute despair. A trap of this type rarely failed. It was designed to destroy tanks, trucks, groups of soldiers, anything unfortunate enough to run over it. "If only we had walked a few more steps," Miller murmured. But Anderson interrupted. "If we had walked a few more steps, we wouldn't even be here to talk." Shock gripped the platoon. No one believed it was so perfectly hidden. The thick snow camouflaged everything. A person could pass by 50 times and never notice. But Cooper did. His nose picked up something humans can't. Maybe the smell of metal, maybe the smell of gunpowder, maybe a faint odor of old oil. No one there knew exactly how, but Cooper did. The commander then turned to the soldiers. "Don't move any further. Stay exactly where you are. If you make the wrong move here, it's all over." Fear gripped the room. The ground seemed heavier. Each soldier felt the cold pierce through their layers of clothing. No one breathed deeply. It was as if the air had frozen in their chests. Cooper, however, seemed fully aware of the gravity of the situation. He took a few steps back, looked at everyone as if giving a silent order, and then stood there, frozen, waiting for someone to understand the message. And it was at that exact second that the commander finally understood. Cooper wasn't just warning about the mine. He was trying to stop the entire platoon from walking straight into a death corridor. Because if there was a trap there, it was almost certain there was more ahead. This wasn't an isolated mine. It was the beginning of a carefully planned ambush. The commander raised his hand. "Let's retreat. Now. Slowly. No rush. Follow the path you came from." The soldiers obeyed. Every step was calculated, measured to the millimeter, as if the entire ground had turned to glass. And, while everyone returned, Cooper led the movement as if he were part of the command. He walked alongside the soldiers, watching every detail of the terrain as if ensuring that no one would step on the wrong spot. It was at that moment that they realized that that single bark, that seemingly simple warning, was the only thing that prevented the platoon from being erased from history in a few seconds. And without even knowing it, that was only the beginning. Because from then on, what Cooper had sensed under the snow would reveal something even worse, something that explained why the enemies were so quiet in that sector. As the platoon began to retreat, no one spoke. It wasn't just fear. It was the clear feeling that they had come within 2 steps of death without realizing it. Each soldier looked at the ground as if it were alive, ready to explode at any moment. The only one who walked with firmness was Cooper. He didn't seem calm, but he seemed certain of what he was doing. He walked ahead, then took 2 steps back, checked the trail, looked at the commander, as if checking if everyone was obeying. When they were far enough away from the area where the mine had been found, Commander Anderson signaled for them to stop. They took shelter behind a row of twisted, half-burned trees, remnants of a previous bombing raid. There, at least, they could breathe. "Right," he said, taking off his helmet for a second to wipe the sweat from his forehead. "That wasn't just any girl. That was an invitation to die." Sergeant Miller, still pale, took a deep breath. "Do you think there's more?" "I'm sure there are more," the commander replied. "Nobody buries a system like that just to catch a small stray group. It was planned, thought out. Someone studied the terrain, waited for winter, counted on the snow to hide everything. If we had advanced, the explosion would have given away our position, and then—" He didn't need to finish. Everyone knew what was coming next. Artillery, machine guns, snipers, the whole package. Cooper sat beside the commander, panting, his muzzle still covered in snow and dirt. Anderson looked at him for a moment, and without saying anything, gave the dog 2 firm pats on the head. It wasn't affection. It was respect. "You're the one who saved us, kid," he murmured. The radio crackled. On the other end, command was asking why the platoon had halted its advance. The order on the map was clear: cross that sector and reach a higher position before noon. Anderson took a deep breath, picked up the radio and replied, "Minefield, heavy trap. If we had followed it, we wouldn't be here anymore." On the other end, silence for a few seconds. Then a short reply: "Confirm the situation and send coordinates, and check for enemy movement." That was the problem. No one had seen any enemy, no shots fired, no shadows running by, no noise other than the wind. And that's precisely why the commander was even more suspicious. "Miller, grab the binoculars. Johnson, come with me. The rest of you, hold your positions. And nobody moves an inch without my command." They crawled up to a small rise sheltered by the trees. From there they could get a better view of the area ahead, as well as the zone they had almost entered. Anderson climbed slowly, lay down on the ground, pressed the binoculars to his face and began to scan. At first everything seemed normal: snow, tree trunks, ancient craters, pieces of twisted metal. But after a few seconds, small details began to stand out. Strange marks in the snow lined up in rows, small mounds that didn't match the natural landscape, and further in the background, almost erased by the distance, very well-positioned shadows. "Machine guns," he murmured. "And over there's a sniper's nest. They're waiting for someone to step on the mines. When it explodes, they'll sweep up the rest." Johnson swallowed hard. "How did they know we were going to pass through here?" "Because that's the obvious route," the commander replied. "Whoever planned this studied our map. They knew the command would send us this way to buy time, and we came, like cattle heading for a fence." Down below, Cooper paced restlessly. He sniffed the wind, glanced toward the enemy line, and growled softly. He sensed something was there, even from a distance. It was as if the smell of gunpowder, gun grease, and even the fear of the entrenched men lingered in the cold air. Anderson went back downstairs, rejoined the group, and quickly explained. What Cooper found wasn't just a mine. It was a trap to draw attention. They were hoping the explosion would give away our position. Then they were going to open fire and wipe us out without giving us a chance to react. We didn't fall because that dog decided to stop. The soldiers looked at Cooper with a different expression. He was no longer the platoon dog. Now he was the guy who had seen what none of them had seen. Private Harris, the youngest, shook his head. I almost complained when he barked. I almost told him to shut up." The sergeant interrupted. "Well, be grateful you didn't do that, otherwise you'd already be in pieces along with the rest of us." But the question that remained was, what now? Because the command wanted progress, but the obvious path was blocked and covered in death. Anderson opened the map, kneeling in the snow. Cooper approached, sniffing the paper, as if he understood that this defined everyone's fate. "If we go around to the left, we'll enter that denser woods, but we risk running into an enemy patrol," said the commander, pointing. "If we go around to the right, we'll enter an area of uneven terrain, with ditches and holes. It takes longer, but it might be less guarded." "What if they mined those sides too?" someone asked. No one answered, because that was the reality. Any direction could be the last. That's when Anderson had an idea that at first seemed crazy. "We'll let Cooper decide." The soldiers looked at each other, confused. "What do you mean, Commander?" He explained it simply. He sensed the danger before we did. He saw, in his own way, what we didn't see. If there's a chance of finding a less risky path, it's by following this dog's instinct. We almost died ignoring him once. I won't repeat that mistake. Anderson then stood up, called Cooper by name, and pointed with his open hand to the vast white expanse beyond where they were. "Find a way, kid. Show us where to go." Cooper stood still for a moment, as if processing it all. Then he turned his snout to the right, sniffed the air, took a few steps, turned back, sniffed the ground. Next, he walked slowly toward his right flank, but not in a straight line. He made turns, avoided certain areas, changed his route, as if remembering something invisible. The peloton began to follow him in single file, with spacing between them, each one exactly repeating the footsteps of the one in front. No one dared to improvise. Each step Cooper took became a point of confidence in the middle of terrain that could explode at any moment. Tension rose. The further they strayed from their original path, the clearer it became that the enemy had set up a large killing zone. In some places, small camouflaged flags could be seen in the distance, marking coordinates for artillery. If they had advanced as indicated on the map, they would have been crushed. And it was there, in that strange and improbable detour following the trail of a dog, that the platoon unknowingly began to position itself to turn the tide, because by circumventing the trap, they would end up exactly where the enemy least expected, on the side of the fortified position. But before that, there was still one detail that no one had noticed, and that Cooper would be the first to feel again. The platoon followed behind Cooper as if walking on glass. No one breathed deeply, no one spoke, no one deviated even half an inch from the trail the dog left in the snow. It was like walking in the dark with a weak flashlight. You could only see the next step, and any mistake could be your last. But despite the tension, something was beginning to change among the soldiers, trust in the animal's instinct. They wouldn't admit it aloud, but they had already understood that this dog was seeing a war differently than human eyes could see. The terrain began to subtly change. The snow was shallower, the wind stronger, and the vegetation sparser. Anderson realized they were entering an area the enemy probably didn't expect anyone to use as an alternate route. It was uneven, full of holes, exposed roots, and broken tree trunks, perfect for breaking an ankle, and that's why no one would choose it on purpose. But Cooper went straight there, as if he knew that precisely because it was difficult, it would be less guarded. As they advanced, Sergeant Miller murmured softly, "He's not just avoiding mines. He's looking for something." Anderson listened, but didn't respond. Deep down, he had that feeling too. Then something happened that at the time nobody understood. Cooper stopped suddenly, raised his snout, took a slow breath, and growled, not at the ground as before, but at the wind. A deep, grave growl that sent a chill down the spine of even the toughest soldier. "What happened?" Johnson asked, already raising his weapon. Anderson watched the dog intently. He recognized that posture, the stiff body, the slightly raised fur, the shallow breathing. It was a sign that Cooper had picked up a scent that didn't make sense there. It wasn't fresh gunpowder, it wasn't metal, it wasn't food, it was something else. Cooper took 2 steps to the left, sniffed again, turned back to the right, circled the group, and stopped behind Anderson. He stared intently at an area of higher ground ahead, where the wind was blowing head-on. "There's someone there," Anderson whispered. "Or there's something there." Harris tightened his grip on the rifle's grip. "But there's no noise at all." "And that's precisely why it's dangerous," Miller retorted. Cooper advanced a few meters slowly, ears perked. He wasn't looking for a mine. He was looking for people, the kind of smell that changes everything. Sweat mixed with gun grease, wet leather, aged uniform fabric, old smoke clinging to the body. This doesn't escape the sensitivity of a trained dog. The platoon pressed on. Now every tree looked suspicious. Every shadow seemed like an ambush about to happen, and the closer they got to the rise, the clearer it became that Cooper was right. Someone was watching the terrain, until the dog froze completely. It stood still, rigid, looking upwards with an expression that no soldier there would forget. Then it gave a single bark, the same kind of bark that had saved the group from the mine. This time the warning was different. "Lie down!" Anderson shouted without hesitation. The soldiers threw themselves to the ground at the same second. A gunshot rang out the next instant. The bullet passed over their heads, tearing a tree branch. If the platoon had taken 3 more steps, at least 2 men would have been hit. "Shooter! Up!" Johnson shouted. 2 more shots came, now trying to guess where the group was hiding. The snow began to rise in small explosions all around. The enemy didn't have a clear view but knew someone was there. Cooper ran to the side, barking aggressively, as if trying to get attention. He would stop, bark, advance 2 meters, bark again, dodge, change angle. It was risky, but he knew what he was doing, confusing the shooter. "He's distracting the guy," Harris muttered, incredulous. While Cooper was doing this, Anderson took advantage of the darkness and raised his binoculars for a second. Barely for a second, but enough to see the glint of a scope reflecting the distant light. There was a sniper camouflaged between 2 burnt tree trunks, right at the peak of the small elevation. The enemy was waiting for someone to fall into another trap, not the mine, but human curiosity. They expected some soldier to approach to investigate. It was a second stage of the elimination plan. "I already know where he is," Anderson said. "Johnson, Miller, flank on the right. Harris, stay with me. The rest of you provide cover." The soldiers moved slowly, gliding through the snow like shadows. Cooper kept barking, shifting positions, adjusting the sniper's shots. Each shot the enemy fired was a smaller chance to calibrate the next. Then came the silence. No shots. Fired. Nothing. "Either he's recharging," Miller said, "or he's figured out what we're doing." "Whatever happens," Johnson retorted, "we need to get there before he escapes." With precision and composure, the soldiers advanced. When they reached the side of the rise, they saw something that confirmed everything. A small nest camouflaged with perfection. Inside it, sandbags covered in snow, organized ammunition, frozen water bottles, and a scoped weapon supported. But the shooter wasn't there. Miller looked around, tense, studying each tree, each shadow. "He's here, I know he is." It was then that Cooper appeared at the top of the hill, staring intently at a point behind the soldiers, and growled. Johnson turned around immediately, raising his weapon. Behind them, half buried among branches, was the enemy sniper, trying to move silently to escape, but he didn't expect to be spotted by a dog from almost 50 meters away. In the swift confrontation, the enemy was neutralized. The platoon managed to secure the area. No one there celebrated, but you could see on their faces that everyone understood what was happening. That dog wasn't just saving lives. It was revealing a whole layered ambush plan, and Anderson knew that if he had a sniper there, the rest of the enemy position would also be armed to kill the next group that arrived. Cooper sniffed the air again and began to walk slowly to the other side of the rise, and the commander noticed the pattern. If the dog had sensed the mine, and then I had sensed the shooter, then the next smell could be something even worse, and nobody was prepared for what he was about to find. The platoon had barely finished neutralizing the sniper when Cooper was already in another mode, as if the confrontation hadn't even happened. He descended the slope slowly, his snout down, gasping for air, as if trying to decipher an invisible secret mixed with the icy wind. Anderson noticed and didn't even need to give the order. Everyone lined up behind the dog, keeping their distance, attentive to his every step. Now no one doubted. The true map of that mission wasn't on paper. It was in the animal's instinct. The terrain shifted as they advanced. The snow felt fluffier, as if it had been recently churned up. Broken logs revealed fresh splinters, and some rocks bore drag marks. None of this was natural. Someone had been there in the last few days, perhaps even in the last few hours. Sergeant Miller noticed this first. "That's not from the wind," he said, pointing to the marks. "Something's been disturbed around here." Cooper growled softly, walking to a spot where the snow was whiter than usual. He sniffed, backed away, returned, and sniffed again. The behavior was identical to what he had shown moments before finding the mine, but this time there was something different. The dog looked at the snow and then at the horizon, as if the danger wasn't just on the ground, but also further ahead. Anderson approached slowly. "What did you find there, kid?" Cooper didn't dig. He didn't bark, he didn't attack, he just stood still, and for that dog that was worse than a bark. It was his way of saying, "There's something here, but there's more beyond that." The commander called in 2 experienced demolition soldiers. They arrived, knelt down, and began carefully removing the snow. A few centimeters deep, they found a thin, rectangular metal box with wires running down and to the sides. Harris swallowed hard. "Another mine?" "No," the expert replied. This is a remote trigger. If someone stepped into the area of the mine where we were, this would ignite a larger sequence, probably explosives buried deeper. A second explosion, Johnson asked. As if the first one wasn't enough. The expert shook his head. No, a chain reaction of explosions, large enough to wipe out an entire company, not just a platoon. Silence fell over everyone. They had already escaped a deadly trap thanks to Cooper. Then they discovered. There was a sniper waiting for the explosion to open fire on the survivors. Now, a second line of explosives hidden even deeper. That entire sector was armed with the clear intention of being a graveyard for Allied soldiers. Anderson took a deep breath. This isn't a typical defense. This is a death zone. They set this up to paralyze the entire advance of our division. Cooper resumed sniffing the wind, taking short, firm steps toward higher ground. He stopped midway and turned his head, as if beckoning the soldiers. "He wants us to follow," Miller said. The group advanced. Each step seemed heavier than the last. The soldiers were already emotionally exhausted, but now they were also beginning to understand the scale of the enemy operation, and the further they advanced, the clearer it became that this area was part of something bigger. When they reached the top of a small hill, they had a vision that changed everything. Down below, hidden among mounds of snow, was a series of wooden stakes covered with camouflage tarps. It was a depot, but not just any depot. It looked makeshift, but too large to be merely a temporary base. Anderson raised his binoculars. My God! Beneath the tarpaulins were boxes marked with symbols for heavy ammunition, fuel barrels, detonators, coiled cables, and metal plates. It was an advanced weapons center, hidden to support the network of explosives and booby traps scattered throughout the region. They set this up to hold back the advance for days, Johnson said, maybe weeks. Or to knock down everyone who tried to cross at once, Miller added. But before they could assess the situation, Cooper froze completely still. He was staring at the warehouse, but now in a different way. It wasn't an explosive alert, nor a shooter alert. It was something far more serious. "Anderson," Harris called, "look at the way he's acting. He doesn't do this for no reason." The commander approached. Cooper's fur stood on end along his spine, his tail slightly lowered. His ears pointed directly at the storage shed. Anderson raised the binoculars again, adjusted the focus, and then saw something that made his stomach drop. There is movement. Behind one of the tarpaulins, a shadow moved. It wasn't wind. It wasn't an animal. It was people. Enemy soldiers, several of them, preparing something. Miller's eyes widened. "Are they planting more explosives?" "Worse," Anderson replied, his voice low and tense. "They're preparing a long-range attack. They're assembling an improvised launcher. If that thing is activated, it could destroy even the troops that are miles behind us." Cooper took a step forward, then another, and then he looked at Anderson as if to say, "Now, before it's too late." The commander understood. "Listen," he said firmly, "that depot can't stay standing. If they activate it, our entire rear line becomes a target. We're going to flank them, enter silently, and neutralize the depot before they finish setting it up." Johnson took a deep breath. "How many men?" "Everyone. But let's go with Cooper in the lead. He'll show you where the snow is safe." The platoon prepared themselves. They checked their weapons, adjusted their helmets, crouched down, and took a deep breath. It was a suicide operation, but they had no choice, and if there was any chance of getting through that minefield alive, it was by following the only one who had seen the whole plan long before everyone else, Cooper. They began to descend the slope in absolute silence, stepping precisely in the dog's tracks. The enemies hadn't yet realized they were being watched, but that wouldn't last long, and Anderson knew it. Every meter was a mixture of tension and adrenaline, and the closer they got to the depot, the clearer it became that this wasn't just a hideout. It was the heart of the entire enemy operation in that area, and if the platoon managed to destroy it, the war in that sector would change completely. But no one imagined that the greatest danger was not yet in the warehouse. It was hidden on the left side of the property, buried deep, and Cooper was about to feel it. The platoon advanced in absolute silence, guided by Cooper as if he were the only lantern in a darkness filled with death. Each soldier tried to control his breathing, because even the hot steam rising from his mouth seemed too loud. The snow crunched under their boots, and this minimal sound was enough to make everyone feel their spines clench. The enemy depot was less than 100 meters away, and the closer they got, the clearer the muffled sounds of metal, wood, and murmurs coming from the tarpaulins became. It was obvious that the enemy was working fast, too fast. But that's when Cooper started acting in a completely different way. He didn't tense up facing the depot. He didn't growl at the enemy soldiers. He didn't position himself on direct alert. In fact, he turned to the left, to an area the platoon hadn't looked at for even a second. It was a seemingly useless strip of land, covered in smooth snow, without tree trunks, without markings, without anything. A space so normal that most soldiers wouldn't even notice it if they were alone there. But Cooper froze. It froze in a way that made everyone stop immediately. First he stopped walking, then he lowered his head, slowly. Then he gasped for air from the ground as if trying to detect something buried meters below. And then he took 2 steps back, and the most terrifying detail, he fell completely silent. Not a growl, not a bark, nothing. Harris swallowed hard. "Commander, this isn't a good sign, is it?" Anderson shook his head, surveying the place. "No, that's a sign that there's something much worse going on." Cooper circled the group, pushed some soldiers aside with his body, positioned himself in front of them, and stood there blocking their path as if to say, "Don't take a step." "He doesn't want us to go there," Johnson said. "That's not all," Miller corrected. "He's saying that nobody even come closer." The command center was on high alert. The demolition expert approached slowly, lay down on the ground, and began to push the snow away with his hands, very slowly, in short movements. When he touched something hard, he stopped immediately. "There's metal here." Anderson crouched down. "What is it?" The specialist continued removing the snow. The metal was gradually revealed. It was a circular plate fixed to the ground, with small slits through which wires passed in various directions. His eyes widened. "This isn't a mine, this is a heavy-impact detonator, and it's large." "How big?" Harris asked, already sweating despite the winter chill. "Big enough to make a hole where there used to be a hill." Silence. The commander brought his hand to his mouth, thoughtful. "When did they set this up to explode?" The expert took a deep breath. "When something very heavy steps on it, like a tank, or—" He paused. "An entire formation. 5 soldiers." Anderson closed his eyes for a second. Now everything made sense. "That's the final trap," he said. "First the smaller mine to draw our attention, then the sniper to get the survivors, then the depot to support everything. And that here," he pointed to the detonator, "is the final blow. They were expecting us to try to flank them on the left. They were going to blow everyone up at the same time." Johnson turned white. We would be right on top of that if it weren't for Cooper." And it was true. If the platoon had followed any obvious human tactic, that detonator would have been triggered. The explosion would have destroyed everyone in seconds. The depot would have served as a second explosion, and enemy artillery, positioned miles away, would have finished the job. It was a perfect plan. But there was a problem. The enemies hadn't counted on a dog's sense of smell. Cooper took a few steps back and sat down, staring intently at the commander, as if waiting for an order. And Anderson understood. "They left this here to blow up the first large group that tried to cross, but they're not going to blow anything up today." He looked at the specialist. "Is it possible to neutralize it?" The expert sighed. "Okay, but I need to make sure nobody breathes incorrectly while I do this." The soldiers positioned themselves on guard around the area, creating a protective circle. And while this was happening, Cooper kept his eyes glued to the area, slowly circling, sniffing the air as if he were watching for something that could trigger an explosion at any second. The dismantling began. Each wire removed was a step closer to death. The specialist worked with steady hands, though his face betrayed his fear. The tension was so great that no one blinked. There was no wind, there were no birds. There was nothing. Only that feeling that one wrong breath could destroy dozens of lives. "Last thread," said the expert. He pulled slowly. A click echoed. Several. Soldiers swallowed hard, until the expert finally spoke. "He is unarmed." The air surged back into the platoon's chest like a wave. Some let out nervous laughs. Others knelt, relieved. It was more than a detonator being disarmed. It was the assurance that this enormous ambush, planned for weeks, had been thwarted. And it's all because of a dog's instinct. Anderson stood up, took a deep breath, and looked at the men. "Listen carefully. If we destroyed the base, neutralized the sniper, blocked the mine and disarmed the detonator. Then the enemy still doesn't know we're here. They think the trap is still working. Miller's eyes widened. Are you planning to attack from behind? Exactly, Anderson said. They prepared everything to kill whoever came by the normal route. They didn't prepare anything for whoever came by the impossible route. Cooper, as if he understood, wagged his tail only once. An attack from behind would be risky. It would be quick, and that would be decisive. But before they could move forward, Cooper raised his head and sniffed again. Something in the air had changed. He felt it, and that meant the worst was yet to come. The platoon was ready to advance. Weapons checked, positions defined, route calculated. Anderson had drawn up a straightforward plan: bypass the depot, invade through the least protected flank, and dismantle the entire enemy operation before they had a chance to react. It was risky, of course, but everything in that war was risky. And the truth is, after getting past a mine, a sniper, and a detonator capable of destroying half a company, nobody there was willing to retreat. They had already come too far. But just as Anderson raised his hand to signal to go ahead, Cooper froze again. This time it wasn't like before. It wasn't a low growl nor a single bark. He simply stiffened his entire body like a statue. His tail lowered, his neck stretched, his gaze fixed. Not on the depot, not on the disarmed detonator, not on the mine area. He was aiming at something behind them. "Commander," Miller whispered. "He's never done this before." Anderson turned his face slowly, following the dog's line of gaze. That's when he saw it. About 150 meters behind the platoon, atop a distant rise, a figure moved swiftly between two trees. It was just a blur, but the detail that gave everything away was the fleeting glint of metal reflecting the pale winter light. He was not a civilian. It wasn't an animal. It was enemy. Scout. And he had just seen the platoon. "Damn it," Harris muttered. "They know we're here." There were no screams, no gunshots, no explosions, but that single sight was worth more than anything. It meant that the entire engineering of the ambush had been exposed. The scout was probably circling the area to check the mines, or just reconnoitering the terrain. He hadn't expected to see a group of American soldiers there, neither alive nor unharmed, and now that he had seen it, he would run to warn her. Anderson reacted immediately. "No one shoots," he ordered. "If they do, we'll give away our real position. They'll think we're still in the minefield. We need to get him before he reaches their base." But there was no time to discuss it. Cooper shot off. It was so fast there was no time to react. The dog ran as if being pulled by an invisible rope, low, fast, focused. It snaked through the snow silently, as if each step was calculated to avoid drawing attention. The enemy scout looked back and saw the scene. A German shepherd coming towards him at terrifying speed. The man tried to accelerate, then he tried to change direction, then he tried to take cover. But Cooper was faster, much faster. "Anderson!" Johnson shouted. "What if he falls into a mine?" "He won't fall," the commander replied firmly. "He already knows where they are." Cooper charged forward, as if he were chasing something essential to his own survival. The soldiers watched the chase with their hearts in their throats. The scout stumbled, got up, ran some more, but now he knew he wasn't going to escape. He drew his weapon, turned quickly to try to fire. There wasn't enough time. Cooper jumped. The impact threw the scout to the ground, sending the weapon flying to the side. The soldiers at a distance couldn't see all the details, but they saw enough. Cooper immobilized the enemy with his body weight, growling loudly, but without biting to kill. He knew, somehow, that they needed that man alive. Anderson and Miller ran over there, arriving breathless. As they approached, they saw the terrified look of the enemy, a young man who couldn't have been more than 20 years old, trembling with cold and fear. "Take away the weapons," Anderson ordered. Miller searched the scout and found documents, folded maps, 2 grenades, and a small signal flashlight. Exactly the type of equipment someone whose job was to warn other posts about suspicious movements. He was going to warn the main base. "This is the "And for us," said Johnson, arriving shortly after. Anderson took a deep breath, looking at the young man. "You know what we found back there, don't you?" The scout, even without understanding English, understood the tone. He looked away. "He knows," Miller said, "and he was going to let us know." The commander looked at Cooper, who remained standing firmly over the enemy. The dog wasn't aggressive. It was simply making sure the man didn't move. With the scout captured, the platoon now knew two things. The ambush wasn't complete. Someone was still monitoring the system. The enemy was waiting for a signal, and if he didn't receive that signal, he would begin to suspect something. Anderson raised his head, tense. They'll realize something's wrong, and they'll come after us. Johnson, still breathless, asked, "What do we do now?" The commander replied without hesitation, "Now we'll use their mistake against them. They expected us to die back there. They didn't expect a dog to ruin their entire plan. We're going to attack the warehouse before they can react. It's our only chance." That's when Cooper barked, not in warning, but in urgency. He looked to the left side of the warehouse at a specific tarp. Anderson noticed and frowned. "What's over there?" Cooper took 2 steps back, as if inviting the commander to check. When Anderson raised the binoculars and focused, his expression changed completely. The warehouse didn't just store explosives, not just ammunition, not just detonators. There was something much bigger inside, something no soldier would imagine finding covered by a tarp in that frozen, remote place, and that would change the entire plan at once. When Anderson finally managed to see clearly what Cooper was pointing at, it took him a few seconds to believe what he was seeing. It wasn't a box. It wasn't an improvised launcher. It wasn't heavy ammunition. It was something far worse. Something that alone could turn the tide of an entire battle. Under the partially raised tarp there was a long-range radio transmitter, of the kind used by enemy units for strategic coordination. A rare long-range piece of equipment capable of communicating direct orders between distant bases. This meant one simple and brutal thing. The depot was not just a technical hiding place. It was the command center for that entire ambush, an advanced communications post used to trigger the sequence of explosives, report progress, and, most importantly, call for reinforcements. "They were coordinating everything from here," Johnson said, astonished. "And if that radio remains intact," Sergeant Miller added, "they're going to bring in heavy reinforcements against us." Anderson took a deep breath, assessing everything in seconds. The enemy had planned a perfect operation: mines, detonators, snipers, ammunition depot, open field, death corridor. And now, with that scout missing, they would certainly begin to suspect something. The radio would allow them to call in an entire troop to sweep the sector in minutes. But that was the loophole. "This radio needs to go down," Anderson said. First of all, the platoon quickly reorganized. Meanwhile, Cooper kept his eyes glued to the canvas. He was restless, pacing in short circles, growling softly, as if sensing something beyond what the men could see. The commander noticed, "Is there anything else there?" Cooper stopped suddenly, turned to the side of the tarp, and dug his paws in. His entire body stiffened, indicating maximum alert. Anderson raised his hand and signaled to Miller. The sergeant advanced cautiously, slowly raising the tarp, ready to retreat at any sign of danger. And then he saw. There was a second metal box, hidden right behind the radio. But this one was different. It was wide, heavy, with a side valve and cables connected directly to the transmitter. Next to it was a manual stopwatch, the kind that could be activated with a simple turn of a key. Harris approached, pale. Is this what I'm thinking?" The expert confirmed, his voice trembling. "This is a self-destruct device. If they lost the radio or noticed an intrusion, they would blow everything up. Radio, storage, explosives, and anyone within the perimeter. A cleanup bomb. And there was the detail that froze every soldier. The detonator key wasn't there. Not even attached. Not even on the ground. Not even hanging. She was missing. And that only meant one thing. Someone on the enemy side had already activated the mechanism remotely, or was about to do so. Before anyone could speak, Cooper barked loudly, a dry, urgent bark, the kind he only let out in the most critical moments. He darted to the right side of the warehouse. The platoon ran after him. When they turned the corner of the tarp, they saw the scene. An enemy soldier, hidden behind a pile of crates, held the detonator key in a trembling hand, ready to turn it. If it spun, everything would explode. "Stop!" Anderson shouted. The enemy looked him in the eyes, then looked at the keys and began to turn it. Cooper jumped. It was a violent impact that knocked the enemy down in the snow. The key flew into the air. Miller ran and caught it before it hit the ground and triggered something. Johnson immobilized the soldier, The specialist checked the device. It hasn't been activated yet, but it was a second away from exploding. Anderson looked at Cooper, unable to believe they were alive. You saved us. Again. Now that the ultimate danger has been neutralized, the commander has made the final decision. We're going to destroy the depot, and we're going to use their radio to confuse their troops before we blow this place up. The specialist found the frequency. Anderson transmitted a false message imitating an enemy accent, stating that Sector 9 was secure and that the trap was intact. Then they collected documents, turned off the transmitter, and prepared charges to safely destroy everything. Cooper stood a few meters away, observing everything, as if he were making sure the Peloton would do the rest of the job right. When they detonated the depot, the explosion echoed through the frozen forest. The snow rose like a white cloud. The heart of the enemy operation was destroyed in seconds. That day the platoon not only survived, it turned the tide for the entire region, and no one doubted the reason. They didn't win because they were stronger. They didn't win because they had more weapons. They didn't win because they were lucky. They won because a dog sensed something under the snow, and it changed everyone's destiny. Would you have noticed that trap hidden under the snow, or would you have walked right past it thinking it was just another war zone? This story shows that sometimes salvation comes from where you least expect it. So leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and comment on what city you're watching from. This helps a lot and makes our community grow.